An exciting story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. She was just an invisible housekeeper until she became involved with the hotel owner. Now she's pregnant with a child by a man who could destroy her, and nobody can know. But what she discovered in rooms 7-17 is more dangerous than love itself. In the pulsating heart of New York City, where modern skyscrapers blend with historic mansions that guard secrets in every century-old brick, the Golden Palace Hotel stands like a fortress of Italian marble and Austrian crystal in the prestigious Upper East Side. Emily Collins, 29 years old, moves through its velvet corridors with silent steps and eyes that have learned to see everything without ever being noticed themselves. A housekeeper since she was 17, she has molded her existence around the art of invisibility, gliding through luxurious environments like an efficient shadow that cleans what others dirty, organizes others' chaos, and erases traces of what shouldn't be remembered. Raised by her grandmother Rose, a woman with hands calloused by domestic work and a tongue sharpened by life's harshness, who supported their home by working as a cleaner in the mirrored offices of Wall Street, Emily grew up enveloped in a dense and suffocating silence about her parents' whereabouts. The only clue she possessed was a photograph faded by time where her mother, young and radiant, appeared smiling at the camera, wearing a delicate golden pendant in the shape of a crescent moon. Whenever Emily questioned about her father, Grandma Rose would turn her tired gaze to the window and murmur that some truths were too heavy to be carried by young hearts. The girl learned early that her survival depended on not bothering anyone, on being functional without being seen, useful without being remembered. At the Golden Palace, this silent ability transformed her into the most requested housekeeper for the presidential suites. Important guests preferred her because she was like air conditioning, absolutely necessary for comfort, but completely imperceptible during operation. Until that rainy Tuesday in March, when Suite 717 was reopened for the first time in almost a decade. Alexander Pierce, 42 years old, had finally returned home. Heir to the vast hotel empire that proudly bore the family name and owner of a fortune built upon 3 generations of business that mixed impeccable luxury with well-kept secrets, he was returning to the city that saw him born after nearly 10 years of voluntary exile. An exile that began on the darkest day of his life, when his wife Isabella, 6 months pregnant with their first child, was found dead in the marble bathtub of the presidential suite, drowned in circumstances that were never fully clarified by investigators. The national press speculated wildly for months on end: suicide motivated by postpartum depression, a tragic accident caused by syncope, disguised homicide. The security cameras presented inexplicable technical failures precisely on that fatal night. Witnesses mysteriously disappeared or suspiciously changed their versions of the facts, and Alexander, devastated by the loss and suffocated by suspicions that hung over his head like heavy clouds, preferred voluntary exile in California to facing daily the malicious rumors that grew like weeds through the golden halls of New York's elite. Since then, he had lived as an elegant social ghost, present only through competent proxies and trusted managers, commanding his vast hotel empire from a safe distance, appearing at rare public occasions as a beautiful and magnetic figure, but remaining dangerously reserved and inaccessible. Those who knew him before the tragedy whispered at charity dinners that he was no longer the same jovial and charismatic man, that he now carried in his green eyes a deep and inexplicable sadness, the unbearable weight of someone who intimately knows the pain of losing everything on a single stormy night. On the grey Tuesday morning when Alexander silently returned to New York, Emily was on the 18th floor of the hotel, pushing her cleaning cart through the silent corridors when she received the unexpected order from Supervisor Martha to immediately prepare Suite 717. No one had mentioned that the hotel owner himself was returning. No one had said that that suite, sealed and untouched for so long that it had already accumulated an aura of urban legend among the staff, would be inhabited again. Emily knew the stories. Everyone at the hotel knew. The suite where the boss's wife had died mysteriously, where housekeepers refused to work alone, where some swore they heard strange noises during the silent early hours. But Emily didn't believe in ghosts. She believed only in honest work and the need to keep her job, to support her grandmother and pay for her evening business administration course. When she opened the heavy door of the suite with her master key, she was greeted by an environment that seemed frozen in time. Furniture covered by white sheets like sleeping ghosts, drawn curtains completely blocking natural light, a dense smell of mold and abandonment. Impregnated in the air conditioning turned off for years, Emily opened the windows wide, allowing the New York breeze to sweep away the weight of the past, and methodically began her work of resurrecting that space. It took hours of meticulous cleaning. Each piece of furniture was uncovered and polished. Until it shone, each surface was disinfected with extreme care. Each detail was checked twice. When she finished, it was already past 8 at night, and the suite gleamed like a palace out of a fairy tale, ready to receive its illustrious new guest. Emily was putting away her cleaning products when she heard the key turning in the lock. Her heart raced. She shouldn't be there at that hour. Important guests didn't like finding staff in their rooms, especially after business hours. She desperately looked for a place to hide, but it was already too late. The door opened, and Alexander Pierce entered the suite. The first thing Emily noticed was that he looked completely different from the photos that occasionally appeared in financial newspapers. Taller than she imagined, with a presence that instantly filled the entire environment. Brown hair slightly disheveled by travel, stubble that gave him a wild and attractive air, broad shoulders under a black leather jacket he carried in his hands. But it was his eyes that completely paralyzed her. Green, like the deep waters of the sea, carrying a sadness so intense it was almost physical. He saw her immediately, standing at the entrance as if he'd been punched in the stomach. For a moment that seemed eternal, they simply stared at each other in absolute silence. Emily felt her cheeks violently blush, lowered her eyes and mumbled an awkward apology. "I'm sorry, Mr. Pierce, I was finishing the cleaning and didn't know you would arrive so early. I'll leave immediately." But when she raised her eyes again, he was still standing there, observing her with an intensity that made her feel as if she were being seen, really seen, for the first time in her life. Not with the distant and arrogant gaze that rich people usually cast on staff, but with something much denser, much more disturbing. "What's your name?" The voice was deep, hoarse, as if it hadn't been used for a long time. "Emily Collins, sir." "Emily," he repeated slowly, as if tasting the name on his tongue. "You've done an impressive job here." She looked around, confused. It was just cleaning, nothing that deserved praise from a man like him. "Thank you, sir. If you'll excuse me." "No." The word came out more abruptly than he intended. Emily stopped mid-movement, the cleaning cart half pushed toward the door. "I'm sorry, I meant, could you stay a few more minutes?" It was a strange request. Dangerous. Emily knew she should politely refuse and leave immediately. But there was something in his voice, an almost imperceptible vulnerability that touched her in an unexpected way. "Do you need something?" Alexander closed the door behind him and moved slowly through the environment, touching the polished surfaces, observing each detail, as if seeing everything for the first time, or perhaps, thought Emily, as if saying goodbye. "It's been a long time since I've been in here." He stopped in front of the window, contemplating the city lights that turned on like earthly stars in the growing darkness. "I didn't know if I could." Emily remained motionless, divided between curiosity and the instinct of self-preservation. Everyone at the hotel knew the tragic story of the suite, but no one had ever spoken about it directly, especially in the presence of Alexander himself. It must be difficult. The words came out before she could control herself. He turned to face her, and Emily saw something pass through his eyes, surprise, perhaps, that someone had the courage to openly acknowledge his pain. "Aren't you afraid of me?" The question caught her off guard. "Why would I be afraid of you?" "People are," he shrugged, a casual gesture that couldn't hide the hurt. "They think I'm dangerous, unstable, a man capable of—" "I don't believe in gossip," Emily interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. For the first time since entering the suite, Alexander smiled. It was a small smile, almost imperceptible, but it completely transformed his expression. Emily Collins. He repeated her name again as if memorizing it. You're different from the other housekeepers. I'm not different. I just do my job. No. He approached a few steps, and Emily could smell the expensive cologne mixed with something wilder, more masculine. You are different. I can see it in your eyes. The comment made Emily's heart dangerously accelerate. There was something in the way he spoke, in the intensity of his gaze, that made her feel as if she were walking on the edge of a precipice. I should leave now, she said in a low voice. You should, he agreed, but didn't move away. But you won't. It wasn't a question. It was a statement loaded with certainty, as if he could read her thoughts. And the most disturbing thing was that he was right. Despite all her instincts screaming for her to leave immediately, Emily found herself completely unable to move. Why did you come back? She asked impulsively. Alexander was silent for so long that Emily thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was loaded with a sadness that hit her like a punch to the chest. Because I got tired of running from ghosts, and because... He hesitated, seeming to struggle with himself. Because I need to understand what really happened here. The confession hung in the air between them like an invisible bridge. Emily felt she was being included in something very intimate, very dangerous. She should distance herself. She should maintain the professional distance she had learned to cultivate over the years. But there was something in that broken man that awakened in her a protective instinct she didn't know she possessed. You don't remember? I remember fragments, loose images, but there are gaps. He ran his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. The doctor said it's normal in cases of severe trauma. The brain protects itself by blocking the most painful memories. Emily nodded, even without completely understanding the magnitude of the pain he carried. But she understood about loss, about living with missing pieces in the story of her own life. I have gaps too, she admitted softly. About my parents, about where I really come from. Alexander studied her with renewed interest. Your parents? My mother disappeared when I was very little. My grandmother raised me but never wanted to talk about what happened. I only have a photo of her and a pendant she used to wear. A pendant? A golden crescent moon. It was the only thing of value she owned, according to my grandmother. Something changed in Alexander's expression, a flash of recognition, or perhaps alarm, that passed so quickly Emily almost doubted she had seen it. A crescent moon. He repeated slowly. Does that sound familiar? No, the answer came too quickly, too defensively. It must be just a coincidence. But Emily saw the lie in his eyes. There was a connection there, something he was deliberately hiding. Before she could press for more information, Alexander completely changed the course of the conversation. You live far from here? In Queens. It takes me almost 2 hours to get to work every day. 2 hours? He seemed genuinely shocked. How do you manage to do that daily? Emily shrugged. That's life. Most of us who work here live far away. It's what we can afford. The difference between their worlds had never been so obvious. Alexander Pierce, owner of a fortune she couldn't even imagine, and Emily Collins, a woman who woke up at 4 in the morning to catch 3 buses and arrive at work on time. You must be tired, he observed. I always am. The raw honesty of the response seemed to touch him deeply. Alexander approached one more step, and Emily could see the small scars that marked his hands, the lines of fatigue around his green eyes. Emily? His voice was softer now, almost whispered. Yes? Thank you. For what? For not being afraid of me, for treating me like a normal person. The vulnerability in the confession completely disarmed her. Without thinking about what she was doing, Emily extended her hand and lightly touched his arm. It was a quick, comforting touch, but the reaction was immediate and electric. Alexander looked at the point where she had touched him as if he had been burned. I really should go now, Emily murmured, suddenly aware of the dangerous intimacy that had been created between them. Yes. He agreed, but neither of them moved. The silence extended, loaded with a tension that Emily had never experienced before. Something was happening there, something that went far beyond the simple conversation between boss and employee. Something that could change everything if she wasn't careful. "Mr. Pierce." "Alexander," he corrected. "You can call me Alexander." It was a breach of protocol that should have alarmed her. Instead, it made her stomach contract in a strange and new way. Alexander. She tried the name aloud and saw how his eyes darkened when he heard it. "I really need to leave now." "You need to," he agreed again. This time Emily managed to force herself to move. She pushed the cleaning cart toward the door, very aware that he was watching her every movement. When she reached the exit, she turned for one last look. Alexander was standing in the middle of the suite, hands in his pockets, a solitary and imposing figure against the luxurious backdrop. His eyes met hers across the space, and Emily felt that electric current run through her body again. "Good night, Alexander." "Good night, Emily Collins." The way he said her name slowly and deliberately made her know that this wouldn't be the last time they would meet. It had been just the beginning of something much more complicated and dangerous than either of them could imagine. As she went down in the elevator, Emily rested her head against the cold wall and closed her eyes. Her heart still beat irregularly, and she could feel the echo of his touch on her skin. She knew she had crossed an invisible line in that suite. She knew she should forget the conversation, keep her distance, return to her safe routine of invisibility. But she also knew it was too late for that, because for the first time in her life, Emily Collins had been truly seen. And as dangerous as it might be, she couldn't stop thinking about Alexander Pierce's green eyes and the way he had said her name as if it were something precious. Outside, the rain began to fall harder on New York City, washing the streets with the promise of changes to come. In the days that followed, Emily found herself constantly thinking about the encounter. During the long journey back home, squeezed into the crowded late-night bus, Alexander's words echoed in her mind like an obsessive melody. The way he had said her name, the raw vulnerability in his eyes, the electricity that had passed between them with a simple touch. She arrived at the small apartment she shared with her grandmother Rose well after midnight. The three-story building in Astoria was a stark contrast to the luxury of the Golden Palace. Peeling walls, staircase without a railing, corridor light that constantly flickered, threatening to go out. But it was home, and Emily had learned to value what she had. Grandmother Rose was waiting for her in the tiny living room, watching the late-night news with the volume turned down so as not to disturb the neighbors. Rose Collins, at 72, maintained the erect posture and attentive look of someone who had faced life head-on and emerged victorious, even if marked by battles. "You're late today," she observed without taking her eyes off the television. "I had to clean a special suite." Emily dropped onto the used sofa they had bought from a second-hand store years ago. The hotel owner came back. This made Rose turn her head, interested. "The Pierce guy?" "The one involved in his wife's death." "The very same." Emily hesitated before continuing. "Grandma, can I ask you a question about my mother?" The mood changed instantly. Rose turned off the television and turned completely to her granddaughter, her face assuming that closed expression that Emily knew well, the same one as always when the subject was the past. "Emily, child, why do you insist on messing with these things?" "Because I have the right to know where I come from." The answer came out firmer than Emily intended. "I'm 29 years old, Grandma. I'm not a child anymore." Rose sighed deeply, her calloused hands nervously playing with the hem of her simple dress. "Some truths hurt more than ignorance, child. Let me decide that." The silence extended between them, loaded with years of unasked questions and unanswered responses. Finally, Rose stood up and went to the old wardrobe that dominated a corner of the living room. From inside a drawer, she removed a worn shoebox. "All right," she said with resignation. "Maybe it really is time." Emily felt her heart accelerate when her grandmother opened the box, revealing some yellowed papers, the photograph she knew well, and some other things she had never seen before. "Your mother's name was Helena Collins," Rose began, her voice careful. She was a beautiful, intelligent girl, but stubborn as a mule, just like you. And my father? That's complicated, Emily. Rose picked up an old paper, a birth certificate. Here there's only her name. She never wanted to tell me who the father was. Emily took the document with trembling hands. There was her name, the birth date, her mother's name, in the line for the father, just a dash. But she worked, right? She must have met someone. Yes, she worked in hotels. Rose visibly hesitated. Expensive hotels in the city center. She was a housekeeper, just like you. The parallel made Emily freeze. Which hotels? I don't exactly remember the names. It was so long ago. But there was something in the way her grandmother avoided her gaze that suggested she remembered very well. Grandma, please. Rose sighed again, defeated. One of them was the Golden Palace. The words hit Emily like lightning. The same hotel. Where I work? The same, Rose reluctantly confirmed. Helena worked there for a few months before you were born. It was new at the time, still being built. It belonged to the current owner's father. To Alexander's father? Emily could barely process the information. To old Vincent Pierce, a powerful, rich man, but... Rose stopped abruptly. But what? Nothing, child. It's water under the bridge. Emily knew her grandmother was hiding something important, but she also knew that stubborn expression well. Rose wouldn't say anything more that night. Perhaps never would. What happened to her? To my mother. She disappeared when you were 6 months old. Rose's voice became choked. She left in the morning saying she was going to sort out some things and never came back. She left you with me and took only the pendant she always wore. Did you look for her? Of course we looked. I registered the disappearance with the police, put up posters around the city, but she simply was gone, as if she had evaporated. Emily looked again at the birth certificate, trying to absorb all that information. Her mother had worked at the same hotel where she now worked. She had disappeared mysteriously, and the only trace she left was a crescent moon pendant that Emily had never seen. Grandma, where is the pendant now? Rose became visibly uncomfortable. I don't know, child. She took it when she left. But something in her grandmother's reaction made Emily suspect there was more to this story. Much more. Can I keep these papers? They can be yours. Maybe. It's better that you know the truth. Rose stood up, suddenly looking much older. Just promise me one thing, Emily. What? Be careful. That Pierce family, they're dangerous. They always have been. The warning hung in the air like a dark cloud. Emily carefully stored the documents and retreated to her small bedroom, but sleep didn't come easily. Her mind was buzzing with questions and disturbing connections. Her mother had worked at the Golden Palace. She had mysteriously disappeared. And now Emily worked at the same place, had met the current owner, had felt that inexplicable connection with him. Could it just be coincidence? The next day, Emily arrived at work with a new determination. She needed to discover more about her mother's story, about her connection to the Pierces, and perhaps, just maybe, Alexander could help her. But when she arrived at the hotel, she discovered that Alexander had left early for a business meeting and wouldn't return until late. Emily spent the entire day divided between disappointment and relief. Part of her desperately wanted to see him. Another part knew she was entering dangerous territory. It was during the cleaning of the suites on the 16th floor that she received the first sign that her life was about to change radically. Supervisor Martha appeared in the corridor with a strange expression on her face. Emily, there's a special request for you. What kind of request? The guest in suite 717 specifically asked for your services. He wants you to personally take care of the cleaning and maintenance of his room. Emily's heart raced. He asked for me? By name. Martha studied her with barely disguised curiosity. What happened last night? Did you do something special? Just my normal work, Emily lied, trying to keep her voice steady. Well, whatever it was, keep doing it. Special requests from important guests are always welcome. Martha handed her a new master key. This is your exclusive responsibility now. Take good care of it. Emily took the key with hands that trembled slightly. She knew she was crossing a dangerous line, but was unable to resist the magnetic attraction she felt for that mysterious man. When she arrived at Suite 717 in the late afternoon, she found a white envelope under the door, with her name written in an elegant masculine calligraphy. Inside, a simple note: "Emily, thank you for yesterday. I would like to talk to you again when I return. Alexander." She put the note in her uniform pocket as if it were a precious treasure. For the first time in years, Emily Collins felt special, desired, seen. It was dangerous and exciting at the same time. While cleaning the suite, she imagined Alexander returning and finding everything perfect, imagined the conversation they would have, the revelations they might share. She had no idea she was already being watched, that her growing connection with Alexander Pierce was drawing the attention of people who preferred to keep the secrets of the past well buried. And she couldn't imagine that her mother's crescent moon pendant, which she had never seen, was at that exact moment stored in Alexander's personal safe, along with other objects that could completely change her understanding of who she really was. The web of secrets, lies, and dangerous passions involving the Collins and Pierce families was just beginning to be revealed, and Emily, unknowingly, was already trapped at its center. Alexander returned to the hotel the following night, exhausted after a full day in tense meetings with investors who questioned his decision to return to New York. The hotel empire's numbers were impressive, but his prolonged absence had created gaps that he now needed to close with a firm hand and renewed determination. When he entered Suite 717, the first thing he noticed was the subtle perfume that lingered in the air, not the artificial aroma of expensive cleaning products, but something more delicate, more feminine. Emily had been there, and somehow managed to leave her presence imprinted in the environment like an invisible but unmistakable mark. Everything was impeccable, each object in the perfect place, each surface gleaming under the soft lights, the towels arranged with an artistic precision that went far beyond basic professionalism. There was special care in that work, an attention to detail that spoke of someone who truly cared about the final result. Alexander went to the private bar and poured 2 fingers of 20-year-old Scotch whiskey, savoring the golden liquid while observing the illuminated city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. New York seethed down below like a living organism, millions of people struggling, dreaming, surviving. Somewhere in that urban immensity, Emily was probably sleeping after another exhausting day of work. The thought bothered him more than it should. Since when did he worry about the living conditions of employees? Since when did a housekeeper occupy his thoughts during important business meetings? There was something dangerously fascinating about that woman, something that awakened in him sensations he had buried along with Isabella. He took another sip and forced himself to think rationally. Emily was an employee. He was the boss. There were social rules, established hierarchies, professional and personal risks involved in any approach, but even as he mentally listed all the reasons why he should keep his distance, Alexander knew it was already too late to turn back. Something had happened that first night, a connection that transcended logic, that defied his defenses carefully built over years of isolation. Emily had seen him in his rawest vulnerability and hadn't run away. She had offered understanding without judgment, compassion without pity. That was rarer and more precious than all the riches he possessed. He finished the whiskey and headed to the bedroom, noticing that Emily had left the curtains partially open so that natural light would gently enter in the morning. One more small detail that demonstrated how she really paid attention to his preferences, even the unverbalized ones. It was then that he saw the envelope he had left for her, already opened and carefully replaced on the bedside table. Emily had read his message and had returned to work normally, which meant she accepted continuing that dangerous game of gradual approach. Alexander smiled for the first time in days. Maybe it was madness. Maybe it was a mistake that could cost both of them dearly. But he was determined to discover how far that connection could take them. The next morning, Emily arrived at the hotel with her heart beating at an accelerated rhythm. She had spent the entire night thinking about Alexander's note, analyzing every word, every possible hidden meaning. The rational part of her mind shouted warnings about the dangers of getting personally involved with the boss, especially a man surrounded by dark mysteries like Alexander Pierce. But there was a more powerful force that impelled her forward, a burning curiosity about the secrets he carried and how those secrets might be connected to her own story. During the morning, she fulfilled her usual tasks with mechanical efficiency, but her mind was constantly turned to Suite 717. She knew that Alexander was probably still sleeping. Important businessmen didn't usually wake up early after meetings that extended into the late hours. But even so, she found herself frequently looking at the clock, counting the minutes until she could go up and see him again. It was around 2 in the afternoon that she received the call. The internal phone rang in the cleaning center, and Supervisor Martha answered with her usual professional efficiency. "Emily Collins, line 2, she announced, extending the receiver to her. Emily took the phone with slightly trembling hands. Few people had the direct number to the center, and even fewer had reasons to specifically request her services. "Hello?" Emily. Alexander's unmistakable, deep voice made her stomach contract. "I need to talk to you. Can you come up now?" "Of course, I'll be there in 5 minutes." "Thank you." The call ended, leaving Emily with 1,000 questions bubbling in her mind. Alexander's tone had been formal, almost cold, very different from the intimacy they had shared the night before. Could it be that he had regretted the approach, that he had decided to maintain professional distance? She took her cleaning cart as a disguise and headed to the elevator, trying to control the anxiety that grew with each floor. When she arrived at Suite 717, she took a deep breath before knocking on the door. "Come in." Alexander was in the main room wearing a white linen shirt that enhanced his tanned skin and impeccably tailored dark pants. He seemed to have just come out of the shower. His hair was still slightly damp, and she could smell the aroma of his expensive soap mixed with something wilder, more masculine. He was speaking on the phone in English, discussing what appeared to be complex details of an international acquisition. Emily entered discreetly and began to organize some objects that didn't need organizing, just to have something to do while she waited. She couldn't help but notice the ease with which he switched between languages, the natural authority in his voice, the way he commanded businesses that moved millions of dollars with the same naturalness with which she chose cleaning products. There's a difference between their worlds had never been so evident. "I'm sorry," Alexander said as soon as he ended the call. "Urgent business that couldn't wait." "No problem. I can come back later if you prefer." "No." He approached a few steps, and Emily felt again that disturbing electricity that seemed to accompany his presence. "I want to talk to you now." The tone was serious, almost solemn, making Emily's heart accelerate for reasons completely different from romantic attraction. "Did something happen? May I ask you a personal question?" The formality of the approach made her even more nervous. "Of course." "Yesterday you mentioned that your mother worked in hotels. In which hotels?" The question caught her completely off guard. "Why do you want to know?" "Please, Emily, it's important." There was an urgency in his voice that made her decide on honesty. "My grandmother said she worked here, at the Golden Palace, when the hotel was still being built." Alexander briefly closed his eyes, as if he had received a blow to the stomach. When he opened them again, there was a deep sadness in them that made Emily want to approach and offer comfort. "When was that?" "More than 29 years ago, shortly before I was born." "And you said she wore a crescent moon pendant." "Yes, my grandmother showed me a photo." Emily hesitated before continuing. "Why are you asking me this? Did you know my mother?" Alexander moved away a few steps, running his hand through his hair in a gesture that was already becoming familiar. He seemed to be fighting an internal battle about how much to reveal. "I need to show you something," he said finally. He headed to the bedroom and Emily followed, curious and nervous. Alexander opened a safe embedded in the wall that she hadn't even noticed before, so well disguised that it seemed just part of the elegant decoration. From inside, he removed a small black velvet box. "I found this among my wife's belongings after her death." He opened the box, revealing a delicate golden pendant in the shape of a crescent moon, identical to what Emily had seen in her mother's photograph. Isabella never wore jewelry like this. When I asked her family, no one knew where it came from. Emily felt her legs weaken. She extended her trembling hand to touch the pendant, and Alexander allowed her to take it. The metal was cold against her skin, but there was something strangely familiar about that object, as if it awakened very old and buried memories. "It's just like my mother's," she murmured. "Identical," Alexander confirmed, "and there's more." He removed a folder with old documents from the safe. "After you left yesterday, I couldn't stop thinking about the coincidence. I spent the night investigating the hotel's old archives." Alexander opened the folder and removed several black and white photographs, clearly taken decades ago. They were photos of hotel employees during construction, historical records that had probably been kept as a memory of the foundation. This photo was taken 30 years ago. He pointed to an image where several workers posed in front of what would become the Golden Palace. Emily examined the photograph carefully until her heart practically stopped. There, among the housekeepers posing for the official photo, was a young and beautiful woman who was unmistakably her mother. Younger than in the only photo Emily possessed, but definitely Helena Collins. And around her neck, clearly visible even in the limited quality of the old image, was the crescent moon pendant. "It's her," Emily whispered, her eyes filling with involuntary tears. "It's my mother." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." She touched the face in the photograph with reverence. "But how did this pendant end up with your wife?" Alexander took back the folder and removed another document, a list of employees from that time. With handwritten notes in the margins. "Helena Collins," he read aloud. "Housekeeper. Hired in March 1994, fired in December of the same year." "Fired?" Emily frowned. "Why?" Alexander visibly hesitated before answering. "The note here says she unauthorized pregnancy." The words hit Emily like a slap. Unauthorized pregnancy, what does that mean? It meant that unmarried pregnant employees were automatically fired at that time. It was a company policy, implemented by my father. Alexander seemed genuinely ashamed to reveal this information. Emily felt a sudden and burning anger rising in her chest. "So my mother was fired because she was pregnant with me?" "It seems so." And after that she disappeared. Emily was beginning to put together pieces of a dark puzzle. She must have been desperate, without work, without money, with a baby on. "The way—" "Emily!" Alexander approached, seeing the growing pain in her eyes. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "It's not your fault." She moved away, still processing the revelations. "But I still don't understand how her pendant ended up with your wife." Alexander was silent for a long moment, and Emily could see that he was hiding something important. "Alexander," she pressed, "what else do you know?" "There are some things I still don't fully understand," he finally admitted. "But I promise I'll find out the truth, for you and for me." "Do you really promise?" "I promise." The intensity with which he said the word made Emily believe him, despite all the mysteries that still hung between them. There was something in the way Alexander looked at her, an almost desperate need to redeem himself for sins that might not even be his, that deeply touched her heart. "Why is this important to you?" she asked softly. Alexander approached again, this time coming so close that Emily could see the small lines around his green eyes, could feel the heat emanating from his body. "Because since you entered this suite, I feel like I'm waking up from a nightmare that had lasted for years." His voice was hoarse, loaded with emotion. "And because I have the feeling that our stories are connected in a way we don't fully understand yet." "Alexander." "And because you make me feel things I thought I would never feel again." He extended his hand and gently touched her face, a light touch like a feather that nevertheless sent waves of heat through Emily's entire body. Emily should step away. She knew she should. This was getting too dangerous, too complicated, but when she looked into Alexander's green eyes, she saw in them a vulnerability that mirrored her own, a need for connection that transcended all the social and professional barriers between them. "This is madness," she murmured, but didn't move away from his touch. "It is," he agreed, bringing his face even closer. "Complete madness." It could destroy us. It probably will destroy us. Then why? Because for the first time in 10 years I feel alive again, Alexander whispered against her lips, and because you're the only person who looks at me and sees a man, not a monster. The kiss that followed was as inevitable as gravity, gentle, at first almost hesitant, as if both were giving sanity one last chance to prevail. But when Emily responded, entwining her fingers in his hair and moving closer, restraint completely dissolved. Alexander pulled her against his body, his strong hands encircling her waist as he deepened the kiss with a desperate passion that spoke of years of loneliness and repressed need. Emily melted in his arms, momentarily forgetting all the complications, all the dangers, all the differences between them. There was only the sensation of being exactly where she should be, in the arms of a man who saw her and desired her with an intensity that made her dizzy. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Alexander rested his forehead on hers, his eyes closed as if he were trying to memorize that moment. Emily. He murmured her name like a prayer. I know, she responded, perfectly understanding what he couldn't express in words. We shouldn't have done that. No. But I don't regret it. Neither do I. They stayed like that for several minutes, simply holding each other, absorbing the magnitude of what had happened. Emily could feel Alexander's heart beating against her chest, accelerated like her own. What do we do now? She finally asked. I don't know. Alexander moved away enough to look into her eyes. I just know that I can't pretend this didn't happen, that I can't go back to living as if you didn't exist. People will talk if they find out. Let them talk. There was an iron determination in his voice now. I spent 10 years worrying about what people thought of me. I'm tired of living my life based on others' judgments. Emily felt a wave of admiration for his courage, but also a growing fear for the consequences this decision could bring for both of them. What about my job? If management discovers... You don't need to worry about that. Alexander held her hands in his. I'm the hotel owner, remember? No one can fire you without my authorization. The reminder of the power difference between them brought back a bit of reality. Emily moved away slightly, suddenly aware of all the implications of that situation. Alexander, this is very complicated. I'm your employee. You are... I'm what? Rich? Powerful? There was now bitterness in his voice. Believe me, Emily, these things mean nothing when you're alone every night, when you wake up every day without having a single person in the world who really cares about you. The raw pain in his words broke Emily's last resistances. She approached, again gently touching his face. I care, she said simply, even knowing all the rumors about me. Even knowing that people believe I might have killed my own wife? I don't believe that. How can you be so sure? Emily thought about the question for a moment, seeking the right words to express what she felt. Because when you look at me, I see kindness in your eyes. I see pain, yes, and secrets. But I also see a man who is capable of gentleness, of vulnerability. Murderers don't cry in the arms of strangers. Alexander looked at her as if she had just performed a miracle. How? Do you do that? He asked in a low voice. Do what? Make me believe that I can be a better person than I am. Because you already are a better person than you think, Emily smiled softly. You just need to allow people to see that. They were interrupted by the ring of the internal telephone. Alexander hesitated before answering, clearly reluctant to break the intimacy of the moment. Pierce. Emily could vaguely hear the secretary's voice on the other end of the line, reporting something about an urgent meeting that had been scheduled. 15 minutes, Alexander responded dryly and hung up. You need to go, Emily said, already. Moving away. Unfortunately, yes, but Emily... He gently held her arm. Can we meet tonight? Outside the hotel. The suggestion was dangerous for several reasons, but Emily found herself nodding before even thinking about the consequences. Where? I know a discreet restaurant in the West Village. Can I pick you up at home? No. The response was automatic, The idea of Alexander seeing where she lived, knowing the poverty of her real life, deeply embarrassed her. "We can meet there." "If—" He noticed her reluctance. He didn't comment. 8 o'clock, Santorini restaurant on Bedford Street. Emily nodded and headed to the door, but stopped when Alexander called her again. "Emily?" "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me a reason to look forward to something again." The words followed her as she went down in the elevator, leaving her heart racing and her mind buzzing with expectations and fears in equal measure. She was getting into something much bigger and more dangerous than she had imagined, but for the first time in her life she felt truly alive. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Emily performed her tasks on autopilot, her mind constantly turned to the meeting she would have with Alexander. She knew she was crossing a line that could change her life forever, but was unable to resist the force that attracted her to him. When she arrived home, she found Grandmother Rose in the kitchen, preparing the simple dinner they shared every night. "You're home early today," Rose observed, immediately noticing that something was different in her granddaughter's expression. "I finished early," Emily hesitated before continuing. "Grandma, I need to go out tonight." "Go out?" Rose turned, completely surprised. Emily never went out at night. "Where to?" "Dinner with a friend." The lie came out with difficulty, and Emily could see by her grandmother's penetrating look that she wasn't being completely convincing. "What friend? You don't have friends, child." Emily sighed, knowing it would be impossible to deceive Rose for long. "It's complicated, Grandma." "Complicated how?" "It's related to work." Rose frowned, her protective instinct immediately alert. "Emily, what's going on?" "Nothing much, just I met someone." "Someone from the hotel?" "Yes." "An employee?" Emily hesitated fatally for too long before answering, and Rose immediately understood that the situation was even more complicated than she imagined. "Emily Collins, tell me right now who you're going out with." There was no escaping the direct question. Rose had a way of extracting the truth that was practically impossible to resist, with Alexander Pierce. The silence that followed was deafening. Rose leaned on the kitchen counter as if she had been punched in the stomach. "Please tell me, you're joking." "I'm not." "Emily, have you completely lost your mind?" Rose's voice was dangerously rising. "That man is what? Say it." "Grandma, do you know something about him that I should know?" Rose became visibly agitated, walking back and forth in the small kitchen like a caged animal. "You can't get involved with that family, Emily. You can't." "Why? And don't come to me with vague stories about them being dangerous. I want the truth." Rose stopped walking and looked directly into her granddaughter's eyes, and Emily saw real and deep fear there. "Because it was a Pierce who destroyed your mother's life." The confession came out as a whisper loaded with pain, "and if you get involved with them, they'll destroy yours too." The words hit Emily like an avalanche. "What do you mean?" "Your mother didn't disappear of her own free will, child." Rosie sat heavily in the kitchen chair, suddenly seeming to carry the weight of all her 72 years. She was expelled, threatened, forced to leave and never return. Threatened by whom? By old Vincent Pierce, Alexander's father. Emily felt the world spin around her. Why? Why would he do that? Rose was silent for a long moment, clearly, struggling with herself about how much to reveal. Because she was pregnant with his child. The final confession came out like a defeated sigh. "Because you, Emily Collins, are Vincent Pierce's daughter, which means that Alexander Pierce is your half-brother." Emily's world collapsed with the force of a devastating tsunami. She clung to the kitchen counter, her weak legs threatening to give way under the weight of the revelation that Rose had just made. The words echoed in her mind like deafening sirens. "Alexander Pierce is your half-brother." "No." The word came out as a desperate whisper. "This can't be true." Rose got up from the chair with tired movements and approached her granddaughter, her eyes full of tears she had kept for almost 3 decades. "I'm sorry, child. I'm sorry for having hidden this from you for so long." Are you sure? Emily turned to face her grandmother, desperately looking for some sign of doubt, some possibility of error. Are you absolutely sure that Vincent Pierce is my father? Rose hesitated for a fraction of a second, and Emily clung to that hesitation like a lifeline amid the shipwreck. Grandma? Answer me. Helena never directly told me the father's name, Rose admitted slowly, but the evidence… Emily, your mother worked for him, got pregnant while she was employed, was fired and threatened by him personally. What other explanation could there be? Thousands of explanations, Emily exploded, denial giving way to anger. Maybe she had a boyfriend. Maybe it was another employee. Maybe… Emily. Rose firmly held her granddaughter's shoulders. I saw how Vincent Pierce looked at your mother when they came to the apartment to threaten us. They came here? Vincent and 2 security guards. Rose's face contorted with the painful memory. Helena was holding you in her arms, you were. Only 2 months old. He said that if she told anyone about what had happened between them, he would ensure she would never get work anywhere again. That you two would live in absolute misery. Emily felt nausea rising in her throat, and she accepted. What choice did she have? She was a young single woman, with no family besides me, with a baby to raise. He was one of the most powerful men in the city. Rose wiped the tears that were running down her wrinkled face. But Helena was stubborn just like you. She said she wasn't going to hide forever, that one day you would have the right to know the truth. And that's why she disappeared? Rose nodded sadly. 2 weeks after his visit, she left in the morning saying she was going to look for a lawyer, that she was going to fight for the rights of you both. She never came back. The reality hit Emily like a hammer. Her mother hadn't voluntarily abandoned them. She had been permanently silenced for daring to challenge Vincent Pierce. You think… Emily couldn't finish the question. I don't know, child, never knew. But I know that men like Vincent Pierce don't make empty threats. Emily moved away from her grandmother, walking to the small kitchen window that overlooked the building's inner courtyard. Outside life continued normally. Children playing, women hanging clothes on the line, men returning from work. Everything exactly the same as an hour ago, when her world still made sense. Why did you never tell me? She asked without turning. Because I was afraid, Rose answered honestly. Afraid that you would do exactly what your mother did, that you would go after the truth and end up disappearing too. And now, why are you telling me now? Because you're already getting involved with them, and because I'm much more afraid of what might happen if you don't know the truth. Emily closed her eyes, trying to process all the information. Her mind automatically went back to the kiss she had shared with Alexander a few hours ago, to the way her body had reacted to his touch, to the intense connection she had felt. If Rose was right, all of that was wrong, very wrong. But there was something that didn't fit perfectly in this story. Grandma, if Vincent Pierce is really my father, why didn't Alexander recognize me? Why didn't he see the resemblance? Maybe you don't look like your father, or maybe he never paid enough attention to you to notice. But Emily remembered the way Alexander had looked at her since their first meeting, as if he recognized her from somewhere, as if there was something familiar about her that he couldn't identify. What if the familiarity he felt wasn't romantic but familial? What if he unconsciously recognized traits of his own father in her? The thought made her feel nauseous again. I need to cancel the date, she said in a low voice. What date? We arranged to have dinner tonight. Rose became alarmed. Emily, you can't meet with him anymore, not after what I just told you. I know. Emily turned to face her grandmother. But I can't just disappear without explanation. I need to at least say I can't see him anymore, then call him. I can't. I don't have his personal number. I can only speak through the hotel. Rose reflected for a moment. Then go to the meeting, but be quick. Tell him you can't see him anymore and leave immediately. Emily nodded, although she knew it would be much more complicated than Rose imagined. How to explain to Alexander that she couldn't see him anymore without revealing the reason? How to look into his eyes and lie about her feelings? How to resist the magnetic attraction she felt for him, knowing that it might be based on something completely forbidden? She spent the next few hours in a constant state of agitation. She took a long shower, trying to wash away the confusion of feelings that consumed her. She chose simple clothes, a white blouse and a dark skirt she had bought at a clearance sale years ago, and wore minimal makeup, just enough not to look sick. During the entire time, her mind didn't stop working, analyzing every detail of the story Rose had told, looking for gaps, for alternative possibilities. There were many assumptions in her grandmother's narrative, many gaps filled with speculation. Was it possible they were wrong about the identity of Emily's father? When it was time to leave, Emily said goodbye to her grandmother with a kiss on the cheek and a promise that she would be careful. "Don't be long, child," Rose said, holding her hand tightly. "And remember what I told you, that family is dangerous." "I'll remember." The trip to the West Village took more than an hour and a half by public transport. Emily took a bus to the subway, changed lines twice, and still needed to walk a few blocks to find the restaurant Alexander had mentioned. During the entire journey, she mentally rehearsed what she would say to him. The words never came out right. The Santorini restaurant was a small and elegant establishment, with discreet Mediterranean decor and soft lighting that created an intimate and welcoming atmosphere. Emily immediately felt out of place among the other clients, clearly upper-middle-class people who regularly frequented that kind of place. Alexander was already there, sitting at the most private corner table in the environment. He wore a navy blue shirt that enhanced his green eyes and dark dress pants, without a tie, with the top two buttons of his shirt casually but elegantly open. When he saw her entering, he immediately stood up, and Emily could see the relief in his expression. "For a moment I thought you weren't coming," he said, approaching to greet her. His expensive cologne enveloped Emily like a cloud, instantly bringing back all the sensations she had experienced during the kiss a few hours ago. Her body automatically reacted, her heart accelerating, her skin tingling where he lightly touched her arm to guide her to the table. "I almost didn't come," she admitted, allowing him to pull out the chair for her. "What made you change your mind?" Emily observed him sitting across from her, noticing how he really seemed different away from the formal environment of the hotel. More relaxed, more human. If there was any physical resemblance between them, she couldn't see it. Alexander had refined aristocratic features, penetrating green eyes, tanned skin that spoke of vacations on exotic beaches. Emily saw herself as completely ordinary in comparison. Simple brown hair, normal dark eyes, skin that rarely saw the sun beyond the way to work. "Emily," he called her attention back, "is everything okay? You seem tense." "I'm fine," she lied, picking up the menu to have something to focus on besides his eyes. Alexander studied her face carefully. "Did something happen after I left the hotel?" "Not exactly." Emily continued pretending to read the menu, although the words seemed blurred before her eyes. "Emily, look at E." His voice was loaded with genuine concern that made her reluctantly raise her eyes. When their gazes met, Alexander frowned. "You regret what happened today." It wasn't a question. It was a statement loaded with sadness and understanding. "It's not that," Emily said quickly, then hesitated. "Well, maybe it is a little." "May I ask why?" Emily took a deep breath, knowing that the moment of truth had arrived. "Alexander, I need to ask you something very important." "Of course. Anything." "Your father, did he have extramarital affairs?" The question caught Alexander completely off guard. He leaned back in his chair, an expression of surprise and confusion taking over his face. "That's a strange question, Emily. Why do you want to know about that?" "Please, just answer." Alexander was silent for a long moment, clearly debating with himself about how much he should reveal. "My father wasn't exactly a model husband," he finally said. "There were rumors over the years. My mother pretended not to know, but yes, I believe he had several affairs." Emily's heart sank. "With hotel employees?" "Among others." Alexander studied her intensely. "Emily, where are you going with this? Did he have children outside of marriage?" This time the silence extended even longer. Alexander picked up the water glass and took a long drink before answering. There were rumors, he admitted reluctantly, never confirmed. My father was very careful not to leave traces of his indiscretions. But it's possible? Anything is possible. Alexander leaned forward, clearly agitated. Emily, please tell me what's going on. Why these questions? Emily felt tears burning behind her eyes. She had hoped he would categorically deny it, that he would say something that completely dismissed the possibility raised by Rose. Instead, he was confirming that her worst fears could be true. My grandmother said something today, she began, with a trembling voice. What? Emily looked around the restaurant, aware that other clients might hear. Can we leave here? Go somewhere more private? Alexander immediately signaled to the waiter, paid the bill without having ordered anything, and stood up. Let's go. They left the restaurant in silence, the tension between them palpable. Alexander guided her to his car, a luxurious black sedan parked on the street, and opened the passenger door for her. Where to? He asked as soon as he got in the car. I don't know. Somewhere we can talk without being interrupted. Alexander drove through the West Village streets until he found a small park with some empty benches. He parked under a large tree and turned off the engine. The public lighting filtered through the leaves, created a pattern of light and shadow inside the car. Now tell me what's going on, he said, turning to face her. Emily took a deep breath, knowing that once she said the words, there would be no going back. My grandmother thinks your father is my father too. The silence that followed was absolute. Alexander remained completely still, as if he had turned into a statue. Emily could see several emotions rapidly passing across his face: shock, confusion, horror, denial. That's impossible, he finally said, his voice hoarse. That's what I thought too. But she told me things. Details about how my mother was threatened by your father, about how she disappeared after saying she was going to look for a lawyer. Emily, stop! Alexander ran his hands through his hair, clearly desperate. Even if this were true, and I don't believe it is, there would be no way to prove it. My father died 5 years ago. I know, but Alexander, Emily extended her hand and touched his arm. What if it's true? What if we really are? No. He moved away from her touch as if he had been burned. I won't even consider that possibility. Why? Because... He stopped, struggling to find the words. Because what I feel for you is not, can't be... Fraternal? Emily finished the sentence he couldn't. Alexander looked at her with an intensity that made her tremble. What I feel for you is the opposite of fraternal, Emily. It's primitive, it's sexual, it's obsessive. If we were siblings, I wouldn't feel this way. His words sent a wave of heat through Emily's body, even knowing she should resist this attraction. People can feel attracted without knowing they're related, she said in a low voice, especially if they've never met before. Do you really believe that? That we're siblings? Emily studied him carefully, looking for any resemblance she might have missed before. But all she saw was the man she had fallen hopelessly in love with in a matter of days, the man whose kiss had awakened sensations in her that she never knew existed. I don't know what to believe, she admitted, honestly. Alexander was silent for several minutes, clearly processing all the information. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. There's a way to find out the truth. How? DNA test. I can arrange a discreet examination with results in 48 hours. The suggestion was logical, but the idea of waiting 2 days without knowing the truth seemed unbearable to Emily. And in the meantime, what do? We keep our distance, he said, although his voice suggested that the idea tortured him as much as it did her, until we know for sure. Alexander. No. He raised his hand, interrupting what she was going to say. If there's even a small possibility that we're related, we can't. He didn't finish the sentence, but Emily understood perfectly. They couldn't touch, kiss, allow themselves to feel the attraction that grew between them with each moment they spent together. All right, she agreed, though the word came out as a painful whisper. Alexander turned to start the car, but Emily held his arm. "Wait." "What?" "If the test confirms we're not related, what happens then?" Alexander looked deeply into her eyes, and Emily saw there both a promise and a threat at the same time. "Then nothing in the world will stop me from making you mine." The intensity of the declaration made Emily's stomach violently contract. There was a primitive possessiveness in his words that should have frightened her but instead excited her in a way she couldn't understand. "And if it confirms that we are?" "Then we'll find a way to deal with it," he said, but there was a determination in his voice that suggested he wouldn't easily accept this result. Alexander drove Emily back to the nearest bus stop, the silence in the car loaded with sexual and emotional tension. When they stopped, he turned to her one last time. "Emily, regardless of what we discover, you need to know one thing." "What?" "You changed my life. In 2 days, you managed to make me feel things I haven't felt in 10 years. That means something regardless of any DNA test." His words echoed in Emily's mind during the entire journey back home. When she arrived at the apartment, she found Rose still awake, anxiously waiting for news. "Well?" her grandmother asked as soon as she entered. "He's going to do a DNA test." Emily dropped onto the sofa, exhausted emotionally and physically. "And how are things between you?" "We're going to keep our distance until the result comes out." Rose nodded approvingly. "That's the best thing to do." But even rationally agreeing, Emily knew the next 2 days would be the longest of her life. Not just because of the anxiety of discovering the truth about her paternity, but because being away from Alexander was already proving physically painful. She had fallen in love with him, completely and irrevocably. And now she had to face the possibility that this love was impossible, forbidden, wrong on all levels. The next morning, Emily arrived at work determined to avoid any contact with Alexander. But when she arrived at the hotel, she discovered he had left early for a business trip to Washington, D.C., and wouldn't return until the following day. His absence should have been a relief, but instead, Emily felt empty, as if an essential part of herself had been removed. She performed her tasks mechanically, counting the minutes until she could go home and try not to think about him. It was during the cleaning of the suites on the 15th floor that Emily made a discovery that would change everything again. Chester was organizing the documents that had been left on the table by a guest when she noticed an envelope that had fallen behind the furniture. When she bent down to pick it up, her eyes were attracted to something familiar. The envelope was addressed to Alexander Pierce, but the sender made Emily's blood freeze. Silver and Associates Private Investigations, confidential report on Helena. Collins. With trembling hands, Emily looked around to make sure she was alone before opening the envelope. Inside, there were several pages of a detailed report about her mother's life, including photographs she had never seen. But it was the conclusion of the report that left her breathless. Based on the evidence collected, including hospital records and witness testimonies, it is confirmed that Helena Collins maintained a romantic relationship with Vincent Pierce between March and December 1994. However, analysis of medical records indicates that the child born in January 1995 was conceived in April 1994, a period prior to the documented beginning of the relationship between Helena and Vincent. Conclusion: probability of Vincent Pierce's paternity in relation to Emily Collins, less than 5%. Emily had to sit on the floor to avoid fainting. Alexander had commissioned an investigation into her family, and the investigation showed that, despite her mother having had an affair with Vincent Pierce, the dates didn't match for him to be Emily's father. This meant they weren't siblings. It meant that the attraction between them wasn't wrong or forbidden. It meant that Alexander had lied when he said they would do a DNA test. He already knew the truth. But it also meant that he had investigated her behind her back, that he hadn't trusted her word, that he had treated their relationship like a problem to be solved through private detectives. Emily folded the report and put it in her purse, a confused mixture of relief and anger taking over her chest. She needed to confront Alexander about this, but he wouldn't return until the next day. It would be a long night of waiting, and Emily had no idea that, in a dark room of the same hotel, someone had observed through security cameras her finding and reading the report. Someone who now knew that she knew the truth, and who was determined to ensure that this truth never came to light. The game had completely changed, and Emily was about to discover that some secrets are kept at any cost, even if it means eliminating those who discover them. Emily spent the night sleepless, the investigation report burning like fire in her purse. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the words printed on the page. Probability of Vincent Pierce's paternity in relation to Emily Collins, less than 5%. Alexander knew the truth for at least a few days and had chosen not to share it with her, leaving her to suffer with the possibility that they were siblings. Anger and relief mingled in her chest, like an emotional storm impossible to control. On one hand, she was immensely grateful to discover there was nothing wrong with her. Attraction to Alexander. On the other, she felt betrayed by his lie, by the secret investigation, by the way she had been treated as a problem to be solved by private detectives. When she arrived at the hotel the next morning, Emily was determined to confront him as soon as he returned from Washington. But her plans were interrupted by an even more disturbing discovery. Supervisor Martha approached her right at the entrance, her face tense with concern. "Emily, I need to talk to you urgently." "What happened?" "Someone broke into your locker in the changing room during the night." Emily's blood froze. "What do you mean, broke in?" "The lock was forced. Nothing was stolen, apparently, but all your things were rummaged through." Martha led her to the staff changing room. "Security is investigating, but I wanted you to check if anything is missing." Emily's locker was indeed a mess. Her spare clothes, personal hygiene products, and some belongings were scattered, as if someone had been looking for something specific. She carefully checked each item, but apparently nothing had been taken. "Strange," Martha commented. "Who would do this? Without stealing anything?" Emily pretended not to know, but a terrible suspicion was growing in her mind. What if someone knew she had found the report? What if they were looking for it? "Must have been some crazy person," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I'll tidy everything up." But when Martha left, Emily discreetly checked her purse. The report was still there, folded at the bottom along with her other belongings. Whoever had searched her locker had not yet found what they were looking for. During the rest of the morning, Emily felt constantly watched. Every noise made her jump. Every shadow seemed to contain a threat. She knew she was being paranoid, but couldn't shake the feeling that something very dangerous was approaching. It was around noon that she received the call. "Emily Collins, line 3, the receptionist announced. Emily answered with a racing heart, expecting to hear Alexander's voice announcing his return. "Hello? Emily." It was a male voice she didn't recognize, distorted as if the person was using some kind of voice modulator. "You have something that belongs to me. Who are you? How did you get this number?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you return what you took from Suite 1547 yesterday." Emily felt the world spin around her. Someone really had seen her taking the report. Someone was watching her. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Emily. I know exactly what you found and read, and I know you still have it." "What do you want?" "I want you to leave the report in the women's restroom on the 18th floor, inside the toilet paper holder in the second stall, in exactly 1 hour. If you do that, nobody needs to know that you've been snooping into things that are none of your business." "And if I don't?" The silence on the other end of the line lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to leave Emily terrified. "Then you'll discover what really happened to your mother when she decided to ask too many questions." The line went dead, leaving Emily with trembling hands and a racing heart. The threat had been clear and terrible. Her mother hadn't simply disappeared, she had been silenced for knowing too much. Emily looked around the cleaning center, suddenly aware that any of the people there could be the one threatening her. Fear mixed with anger, creating an explosive combination that made her make a risky decision. She wasn't going to surrender the report. Not without a fight. Instead, she went to one of the hotel's copy machines and made several copies of the document, hiding the originals in different places. If something happened to her, at least there would be evidence. During the next hour, Emily developed a plan. She would go to the meeting in the bathroom, but would only take a partial copy of the report, enough to deceive whoever it was, but keeping the most important information with herself. When she arrived on the 18th floor, the corridor was completely empty. The women's restroom was silent, only the low hum of the air conditioning breaking the absolute silence. Police entered the second stall and hid the falsified pages where she had been instructed. She was leaving the bathroom when she heard footsteps in the corridor. Panic took hold of her when she realized that someone had locked the bathroom door from outside. "Hello?" she shouted, knocking on the door. "Is anyone there?" Silence was her only response. Emily tried the handle repeatedly, but the door didn't move. She was trapped. Her cell phone had no signal on that floor and nobody knew where she was. It was then that she heard the voice coming from the bathroom's sound system, speakers that normally played ambient music, now transmitting a message that made her freeze with terror. Very clever, Emily Collins, but not clever enough. "Who are you?" she shouted at the ceiling, knowing that whoever it was listening. Someone who works very hard to keep certain secrets buried. Someone who won't allow a curious housekeeper to destroy decades of careful work. "What do you want?" "I want the real report, not the fake pages you tried to give me." Emily leaned against the wall, trying to think quickly. Whoever it was really knew everything about her, was always one step ahead. "And if I give you the real report, then maybe you'll stay alive to see tomorrow." The threat was clear and direct, but Emily had learned from her mother that surrendering to blackmail didn't guarantee safety. It only postponed the inevitable. "I need guarantees," she said, trying to keep her voice firm. "You're not in a position to make demands." It was then that Emily heard something that made her smile for the first time since everything had begun. Footsteps in the corridor. Footsteps she would recognize anywhere. "Emily?" Alexander's voice echoed from the other side of the door. "Are you in there?" "Alexander!" she shouted, knocking on the door hard. "The door is locked!" In seconds, the handle turned and the door opened, revealing Alexander with an expression of concern and confusion that quickly transformed into alarm when he saw the state she was in. "What happened? Why were you locked in here?" Before Emily could answer, a voice came from the speakers again, this time clearly directed at Alexander. "Welcome back, Mr. Pierce. What perfect timing." Alexander looked at the ceiling with an expression that mixed recognition and fury. "I know who you are," he said in a low, dangerous voice. "I'm sure you do. Just as I know that you have some secrets you also prefer to keep buried." "Leave her out of this." "Impossible. She's already too involved, just like her mother was." Emily looked between Alexander and the speakers, realizing that there was a much bigger story happening here, secrets that involved not just her family, but his as well. "Alexander," she held his arm. "Do you know who this person is?" He hesitated before answering, and Emily saw in that moment that he was struggling between protecting her and telling the truth. "It's complicated." "It's not complicated," the voice from the speakers interrupted. "It's actually quite simple. Your dear Alexander knows exactly who I am because he's been doing business with me for years." Emily felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. "What does that mean?" Alexander briefly closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, there was a deep sadness in them. "It means there are things about me that you don't know, things I hoped you would never discover." "What kind of things?" "The kind of things that can get us both killed if they reach the wrong ears." The voice continued through the speakers, clearly enjoying the drama it was creating. Alexander held both of Emily's hands, looking deeply into her eyes. "Emily, I need you to trust me, now more than ever. Regardless of what you hear in the next few minutes, remember that what I feel for you is real. You're scaring me." "You should be scared," the voice mocked, "because the man you've fallen in love with has blood on his hands, including your mother's blood." Emily's world collapsed for the second time in 48 hours. She looked at Alexander, searching for some sign of denial, some indication that the accusation was false. But all she saw in his eyes was guilt, "Is it true?" she whispered. Alexander didn't immediately respond, and his silence was more deafening than any confession. "Emily," he finally began. "Is it true?" she repeated, louder this time, moving away from him. "Not in the way you're thinking. Then explain it to me the way it really was." Alexander ran his hand through his hair, the familiar gesture now loaded with desperation. "Your mother. She wasn't directly killed, but she died because of information that I should have protected better." The words hit Emily like bullets. "What information?" "Information about family business that went far beyond hotels. Business that involved dangerous people, dirty money, deals that could destroy many important lives if they were exposed. And my mother discovered this. She saw things she shouldn't have seen, heard conversations she shouldn't have heard. And when she decided she was going to use that information to guarantee a better future for you, you killed her." Emily finished the sentence, tears beginning to run down her face. "I didn't kill her," Alexander said firmly. "But I also didn't protect her as I should have, and that's a guilt I carry every day for the past 29 years. The confession hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. Emily moved even further away from Alexander, leaning against the corridor wall. "You lied to me. About everything. Not about my feelings, never about that. How can I believe you? How can I trust a single word that comes out of your mouth? Because you know me, Emily. You know who I really am underneath all these secrets." "No," she violently shook her head. "I don't know you. I fell in love with a lie." The pain in Alexander's eyes was palpable, but Emily was beyond caring about that. She had discovered that the man she loved was involved in her mother's death. There was no going back from that. "Emily, please." Alexander extended his hand to her, but Emily moved away as if he were poisonous. "Don't touch me. Never touch me again." She began to walk rapidly toward the elevator, desperate to get out of there, away from Alexander and all the lies that had built their relationship. "Emily, wait!" Alexander shouted behind her. "You can't leave like this. It's not safe." But Emily didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She needed to get out of that hotel, that world of luxury and lies, that man who had stolen her heart only to destroy it with devastating revelations. When the elevator doors closed, the last thing she saw was Alexander standing in the corridor, a solitary and desperate figure against the luxurious backdrop that suddenly seemed as fake as everything else in her life. But Emily didn't know that her desperate escape was being carefully observed by someone who had orchestrated that entire revelation. Someone who now had exactly what they wanted. Emily and Alexander separated, distrusting each other, vulnerable. And this person wasn't going to waste the opportunity to deliver the final blow. Emily ran through the streets of New York as if she were being chased by demons. Tears obscured her vision as she pushed through the afternoon crowd, with no certain destination, just a desperate need to get away from the Golden Palace and everything it represented. Each step she took echoed with the devastating words she had just heard. Alexander was involved in her mother's death. She stopped at a crowded bus stop, breathless and trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. The man she had fallen hopelessly in love with, who had awakened sensations in her that she didn't even know existed, who had made her heart race with a simple look, this same man carried the guilt for the destruction of her family. When she finally arrived at the small apartment in Astoria, Emily found Grandmother Rose in the kitchen peeling potatoes for dinner. The older woman's experienced gaze immediately captured her granddaughter's devastated emotional state. "My God, Emily, what happened?" Emily dropped into a chair, her strength finally abandoning her. "You were right, Grandma. About the Pierces being dangerous, about me not getting involved with them." Rose put down the knife and approached, holding her granddaughter's trembling hands. "Tell me everything." Between broken sobs, Emily reported the day's events, the violated locker, the telephone threats, being trapped in the bathroom, and, finally, Alexander's terrible confession about his role in Helena's death. Rose listened in silence, her expression becoming darker with each revelation. When Emily finished, her grandmother got up and went to the window, contemplating the night that was approaching over the city. "I knew this would happen," she finally said, her voice loaded with sadness and anger. "I knew that if you got close to them, they would find a way to hurt you, too." "Grandma, there's one more thing." Emily hesitated before continuing. "Alexander commissioned an investigation into our family. He discovered that Vincent Pierce is not my father." Rose turned abruptly. "What do you mean?" "The dates don't match. My mother only got involved with Vincent after I had already been conceived." Visible relief passed over Rose's face, followed quickly by confusion. "Then who is your father?" "I don't know, and now maybe I'll never find out." Rose returned to her granddaughter, sitting heavily in the chair beside her. "Emily, there are things about your mother that I never told you. Things that maybe it's time for you to know." "What things?" "Helena wasn't just an ordinary housekeeper." Rose took a deep breath before continuing. "She was very intelligent, very observant. She always had a facility for discovering people's secrets. Since she was little, she could see through others' lies. And that has to do with what happened to her?" "It has everything to do with it." Rose got up again, going to the old wardrobe. From inside a secret drawer that Emily had never noticed, she removed a small metal box. "Your mother left me this before she disappeared. She said that if anything happened to her, I should give it to you when you turned 30. Emily looked at the box with a mixture of curiosity and fear. "What's inside?" "I don't know, I never opened it. Helena said it was for you to decide whether or not you wanted to know the whole truth about your family." With trembling hands, Emily took the box. It was surprisingly heavy for its size. There was a small lock, but the key was attached to the side with yellowed adhesive tape. "Are you sure you want to open it?" Rose asked softly. "Some truths can't be undone." Emily thought about the last 48 hours, about all the revelations that had turned her life upside down. More secrets couldn't make things worse than they already were. "I'm sure." She turned the key in the lock and opened the box slowly. Inside there were several photographs, documents, and a small digital recorder, relatively new technology, for the time when her mother had disappeared. The first photograph made Emily gasp. It was Helena, young and radiant, beside a man who was definitely not Vincent Pierce. The man was younger, had wavy dark hair and gentle eyes that looked at Helena with obvious adoration. "Who is this man?" Emily showed the photo to Rose. Her grandmother put on her reading glasses and carefully examined the image. "I've never seen him before, but look at how he looks at your mother. It was love, no doubt." Emily examined the other photographs. There were several of the same man with Helena, somewhere she was visibly pregnant. In one of the last photos, the man was holding a baby, Emily, with an unmistakable expression of paternal pride. "This must be my father," she murmured, gently touching the image. But it was when she saw the documents that everything became shockingly clear. There were birth certificates, marriage records, and most importantly, a death certificate dated December 1994, 1 month before Emily's birth. "Robert Williams," Emily read the name aloud, "died in a car accident in December 1994. Rose took the document, examining it carefully. "So your mother was married, and widowed shortly before you were born, and then got involved with Vincent Pierce out of desperation." Emily was beginning to understand the sequence of events. A young widow, pregnant with no money. It must have been easy for him to take advantage of the situation. But why did Helena never tell me about Robert? Emily picked up the digital recorder, her hands trembling slightly. "Maybe she did tell for you to hear when you were ready." She pressed the play button, and her mother's voice filled the small apartment, bringing back memories that Emily didn't even know she possessed. "My dear Emily," Helena's voice was young, full of life but carrying a deep sadness. "If you're hearing this, it means something has happened to me. It means that the people I was trying to confront managed to silence me." Emily felt fresh tears running down her face. It was the first time she had heard her mother's voice since her earliest childhood. "Your father was a wonderful man," Helena continued. "Robert Williams. He loved me more than any person deserves to be loved. You would have adored each other. He was so eager to meet you, talked about all the plans he had to be the best father in the world." The voice paused for a moment, and Emily could hear Helena crying softly. But he died a week before you were born. And I was lost, desperate. That's when I met Vincent Pierce. He seemed like a savior at the time. Offered work, protection, a future for us both. Rose held Emily's hand as they continued listening. But I discovered that Vincent wasn't just interested in helping me, he wanted control. And when I realized I was being used to launder money through the hotel, when I saw the terrible things the Pierce family did to maintain their power, I knew I had to get out. The recording paused again, and when Helena returned to speak, her voice was different, more determined, more frightened. But they won't let me leave easily. I know too many secrets, I've seen too many things, and there are people in the Pierce family who are much more dangerous than Vincent. Emily looked at Rose, seeing her own fear reflected in her grandmother's eyes. If anything happens to me, Emily, know that I fight for you, for your future, for your freedom. Don't let them control you like they controlled me. Helena's voice became more urgent. And beware of Margaret Pierce, Vincent's wife. She is much more dangerous than she appears. It was she who ordered Robert to be killed when she discovered our marriage. It was she who orchestrated everything to force me to work for them. The recorder was silent for several seconds before Helena spoke for the last time. I love you more than life, my daughter. Be strong, be free, and never trust any Pierce. The silence that followed the end of the recording was absolutely deafening. Emily felt as if she had been struck by lightning. Her father had been murdered. Her mother had been forced to work for his killers. And now she had fallen in love with the son of one of the people responsible for destroying her family. Margaret Pierce, Rose murmured. I never heard that name. She must have died, or... Emily stopped mid-sentence, a terrible realization, taking shape in her mind. Grandma, what if she didn't die? What if she's still alive? What do you mean? The person who threatened me today. The voice was distorted, but what if it was a woman? What if it was Margaret? Rose seemed frightened by the possibility. But why would she come back now, after all these years? Emily thought quickly. Because I got close to Alexander. Because I discovered the investigation report. Because I was starting to ask questions about the past. Suddenly the house phone rang, making both of them jump in fright. Emily answered with trembling hands. Hello? Emily. It was Alexander, his voice loaded with desperation. Thank God you answered. I don't want to talk to you. Emily, please listen. You're in danger. More danger than you can imagine. Why should I believe you? Because I just discovered who was threatening you today, and she won't stop until you're dead. Despite her anger, Emily felt fear growing in her chest. Who is it? My Aunt Margaret, my older uncle's widow. She controls a significant part of the family business, especially the less legal ones. Emily felt the world spin again. She's alive? Very much alive, and very dangerous. Emily, you need to get out of there now. Why should I trust you? You lied about everything. Because regardless of my mistakes, I don't want you to die, Alexander's voice was broken, desperate. Because I truly love you, even knowing I don't deserve your forgiveness. Emily looked at Rose, who had heard part of the conversation. Her grandmother slowly nodded, indicating that perhaps Emily should at least listen. What do you know about her? Margaret has always been the true mind behind the family's dirty business. My father was just the public face. She's the one who gave the orders, who eliminated threats. Alexander took a deep breath before continuing. And she was the one who ordered your mother's death. How do you know that? Because after you left today, she contacted me. Said she was tired of playing cat and mouse, that she was going to eliminate you tonight. Emily's blood froze. Where is she now? I don't know, but I have men looking. Emily, you need to come. With me. It's the only place where I can guarantee your protection. I'll never go back to that hotel. Not to the hotel. I have a safe house outside the city, a place Margaret doesn't know about. Emily hesitated. Every instinct screamed not to trust Alexander, but her mother's recording had confirmed that Margaret Pierce was indeed a killer. And what if Alexander was telling the truth about her being in immediate danger? Emily, Rose whispered. Maybe it's better if you go with him, at least until we figure out what this woman wants. You heard my grandmother, Emily said to the phone. She thinks I should trust you. Your grandmother is a wise woman. Where do we meet? Can I pick you? Both up there? No. Emily still wasn't ready to let Alexander see where she lived. We'll meet at the Queen's Center Mall in the food court in 1 hour. Emily, 1 hour, Alexander, and you come unarmed and alone. All right, but please, be careful until then. Emily hung up the phone and looked at her grandmother. Are you sure we should trust him? I'm not sure of anything, child, but I know we can't face a killer by ourselves. They spent the next hour gathering some essential clothes and hiding the documents and recordings in safe places. Emily made several copies of everything, leaving originals with trusted neighbors. If anything happened to them, at least the truth about Helena would be preserved. When they arrived at the mall, they found Alexander waiting exactly where they had arranged. He looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept in days. He wore casual clothes, jeans, and a simple t-shirt, instead of his usual suits, which made him seem more human, more accessible. "Thank you for coming," he said when they approached. "Don't thank me yet," Emily responded coldly. "I'm still deciding if you're part of the solution or part of the problem." Alexander nodded, accepting her hostility. "That's fair, but first, I need you both to be safe. Then we can deal with everything that happened between us." Rose studied Alexander carefully. "You look like your mother," she said unexpectedly. Alexander seemed surprised. "You knew my mother?" "Elizabeth Hayes Pierce. She used to come to the market where I worked when I was young. A kind woman, very different from the rest of the family." Rose hesitated before continuing. "I heard she died in suspicious circumstances." "My mother was poisoned by Margaret," Alexander said simply, "when I was 16 because she had discovered about the illegal business and threatened to expose everything." Emily felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Alexander had also lost his mother to the cruelty of the Pierce family. "Why did you never do anything about it?" she asked. "Because I was a scared kid with no proof, and because Margaret convinced me that if I said anything, she would kill all the people I loved." Alexander looked directly into Emily's eyes. "It's the same threat she's making now about you." They were interrupted by the sound of a cell phone ringing. Alexander answered quickly. "Hello? Where? Are you sure? I understand. Keep your distance and inform me of any movement." He hung up with a grim expression. "That was one of my security guards. Margaret just arrived at your building." Rose turned pale. "She knows where we live." "Margaret knows everything about you both. She's been investigating Emily since the day she started working at the hotel." Alexander urgently stood up. "We need to leave the city now." "Wait," Emily held his arm. "I won't keep running forever. If she wants to find me, let her find me, but it will be on my terms." "Emily, you don't understand. Margaret has killed dozens of people over the years. She won't hesitate to kill you too." "Maybe not, but she needs me alive for now." "Why?" Emily smiled coldly. "Because I have something she wants very badly." She took her phone and dialed the hotel number, asking to be transferred to the presidential suite, where she suspected Margaret was staying. "Hello, Margaret," she said when the call was answered. "Emily Collins." The voice on the other end was no longer distorted, revealing the refined but cold tone of an older woman. "What a surprise, not." "You want the documents my mother left?" "Among other things." "Then let's make a deal. You stop threatening me and I'll hand everything over." Margaret laughed, a humorless sound. "You really think you're in a position to negotiate? I think you won't kill me until you have what you want. And I think you know that if anything happens to me, the documents will end up in the hands of the FBI." The silence on the other end of the line lasted several seconds. "You're smarter than your mother," Margaret finally said. "I'm her daughter." All. "Right, let's meet, but it will be where I choose, when I choose. Golden Palace Hotel, Suite 717, midnight." "Interesting choice, the place where my daughter-in-law died." Emily felt her blood freeze. Isabella was killed by you? Isabella was asking too many questions about the past, just like you, just like your mother. Margaret showed no remorse. Midnight, Emily, and come alone. The call ended, leaving Emily with her heart beating frantically. She looked at Alexander and Rose, who had heard part of the conversation. You've completely lost your mind, Alexander said. I'm not going to let you go there. It's not your choice. Emily, she'll kill you. Maybe, but at least I'll die knowing the truth about my family. Emily held her grandmother's hands. Grandma, if something happens to me— Nothing is going to happen, Rose interrupted firmly, because you're not going alone. Margaret said many things, but she forgot that you're no longer alone in this fight. Rose looked at Alexander. Do you love my granddaughter? More than my own life. Then prove it. Alexander slowly nodded, understanding what Rose was proposing. Let's end this tonight, once and for all. Emily looked between the two, realizing that regardless of what happened in Suite 717, her life would never be the same again. For better or worse, the time had come for the final confrontation with the ghosts that had haunted her family for almost 3 decades, and this time she wouldn't run away. At midnight, the Golden Palace was immersed in an almost sepulchral silence. The lobby lights were reduced to a minimum, creating long shadows that danced on the marble walls like ghosts from the past. Emily crossed the main hall with determined steps, each heel beat echoing like a war drum announcing the final battle that was about to come. Alexander had insisted on accompanying her until the last moment, and now walked at her side as tense as a violin string about to break. Rose had stayed in the car in the underground garage with clear instructions to call the police if they had no news in 2 hours. There's still time to change your mind, Alexander murmured while they waited for the elevator. There isn't, Emily replied, discreetly checking the small recorder she had hidden in her blouse. This needs to end today. Emily. He gently held her arm. Regardless of what happens up there, I want you to know that these last few days have been the best of my life in 10 years. She looked into his green eyes, seeing there a mixture of love, fear, and determination that made her heart accelerate, despite all the hurt. When this is over, we need to talk. About everything. About everything, he agreed. The elevator doors opened, revealing the mirrored interior that reflected their images like a multiplied omen. During the silent ascent to the 17th floor, Emily felt the weight of all the generations of her family that had been destroyed by the greed and cruelty of the Pierces. Tonight, the debt would be collected. The 17th floor corridor was completely empty, illuminated only by emergency lights that created an almost ghostly environment. Emily headed to Suite 717, her heart beating so hard she was sure Alexander could hear it. Remember the plan, she whispered. You stay hidden until I give the signal. And if she tries to hurt you before that? She won't. She still needs to find out where the documents are. Alexander hid in a nearby niche, and Emily took a deep breath before knocking on the suite door. The response came immediately. Come in, it's open. Emily turned the handle and entered the suite where everything had begun a few days ago. The luxurious decoration was exactly as she remembered, but now there was a sinister presence in the environment that made her skin crawl. Margaret Pierce was sitting in a leather armchair, with her back to the door, observing the night view of the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was a woman in her 70s, with perfectly arranged silver hair and an aristocratic posture that spoke of decades of absolute power. She wore an elegant dark suit and discreet but expensive jewelry. Emily Collins, she said without turning. We finally meet in person. Margaret Pierce. Emily closed the door behind her, keeping her voice firm. The woman who destroyed my family. Oh dear. Margaret turned slowly, revealing a face that had once been beautiful but was now marked by years of calculated cruelty. Her eyes were cold as ice, devoid of any trace of humanity. I merely protected my family. Your mother and that pathetic husband of hers represented a threat. A threat to what? To your dirty business. Margaret smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach her eyes. You really are Helena's daughter. The same naive arrogance. And you really are a murderer. Emily took a few steps into the room, maintaining a safe distance. How many people have you killed over the years? I've lost count, Margaret responded with shocking indifference, but each death was necessary. Each elimination served a greater purpose, including Isabella's death. Ah, poor Isabella, Margaret sighed theatrically. A desperate romantic who fell in love with the wrong man. She was getting too curious about the family's past, asking too many questions about business that was none of her concern. Emily felt nausea rising in her throat. You drowned her in the bathtub. It was surprisingly easy. Pregnant women get dizzy easily. A little push at the right time, some air bubbles forced down and done. Another tragic accident. The casual cruelty in Margaret's voice made Emily tremble with anger. And you let Alexander carry the guilt all these years. Alexander was always too emotional, just like his mother. Elizabeth was another pathetic romantic who couldn't understand that sometimes business requires sacrifices. That's why you killed her too. Elizabeth discovered about the loans we were making to criminal organizations, threatened to tell everything to the FBI. Margaret stood up from the armchair, walking slowly toward the sweets bar. Poison is much cleaner than other methods. Looks like a natural heart attack, Emily observed. Margaret's every movement, noticing how the older woman moved with the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences for her actions. And my father? Robert? Ah, Robert Williams. Margaret served herself a glass of expensive cognac. That was a more complicated job. We had to forge a convincing car accident. Why? He didn't even know about you. But your mother knew. And once she married him, Robert became an inconvenient connection to our operation. Margaret took a sip of cognac, savoring it as if she were discussing the weather. Besides, Helena, pregnant and desperate, was much more useful to us than Helena, happy and protected by a husband. The coldness with which Margaret spoke about the destruction of human lives made Emily feel a purer and more intense anger than anything she had ever experienced. You took everything from her. Her husband, her security, her daughter. And yet she didn't know how to stay quiet. Margaret shook her head with false sadness. Helena was always too stubborn for her own good. When she decided to look for a lawyer, we had no choice. Where is my mother's body? Somewhere it will never be found. Margaret smiled cruelly. Just like yours will be in a few hours. You're so sure of that? Darling, I've been eliminating threats for 50 years. You're just another stupid young woman who doesn't know when to stop asking questions. Emily took a few more steps, strategically positioning herself near the coffee table. But this time it's different. How so? This time, you're not just dealing with me, Emily smiled, and for the first time since she had entered the suite, she saw a small uncertainty pass through Margaret's eyes. Alexander, you can come in now. The suite door opened and Alexander entered, closing it behind him. Margaret looked at him with a mixture of surprise and irritation. Alexander, what a disappointment. I thought you had more sense of self-preservation. It's over, Margaret, Alexander said, his voice carrying an authority that Emily had never heard before. 50 years of murders, blackmail, and terrorism. It ends today. Margaret laughed, quickly recovering her composure. You really think you can stop me? Boy, I was killing enemies when you were still in diapers. Maybe, but you made a fatal mistake this time. Which one? You confessed everything. Emily raised the small recorder that had been recording the entire conversation. Each murder, each detail, each crime. It's all here. Margaret's expression instantly changed, the mask of control coming undone to reveal pure murderous fury. You clever little bitch. Margaret plunged her hand into the purse that was on the side table, pulling out a small but lethal pistol. She pointed it first at Emily, then hesitated and directed the gun at Alexander. Give me the recorder or he dies. No, Emily said firmly. You've killed enough people. Then you'll watch the man you love die because of you, just like your mother watched Robert die. Margaret was about to pull the trigger when a new voice echoed through the suite. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Everyone turned to see Rose Collins entering through the door, accompanied by two men in dark suits whom Emily didn't recognize. "Grandma? What are you doing here?" "Protecting my granddaughter," Rose responded, but there was something different in her posture, in her voice. "And finally, getting justice for my daughter's death." Margaret kept the gun pointed at Alexander, but now seemed genuinely confused. "Who are these people?" "FBI agents," one of the men showed his badge. "Rose Collins contacted us this afternoon with evidence of a money laundering network and murders that dates back 5 decades. Emily looked at her grandmother, astonished. "Grandma, how did you... You think I spent all these years without planning how to get justice for Helena?" Rose approached more, her eyes fixed on Margaret. "I knew that one day you would make a mistake. And when my granddaughter got involved with this family, I knew the time had come." The second agent moved strategically to surround Margaret. "Mrs. Pierce, put down the weapon. You're surrounded." "Never," Margaret screamed, her voice shrill with desperation. "I'd rather die than spend the rest of my life in prison." "That can be arranged," Rose said coldly. Margaret hesitated for a fraction of a second, time enough for Alexander to throw himself at Emily, knocking her to the floor, at the exact moment when the first shot echoed through the suite. The noise was deafening in the closed space, immediately followed by screams and the sound of more shots. When Emily managed to get up, she saw Margaret on the floor, a red stain spreading across her expensive dark suit. The federal agents approached, cautiously, checking if she still represented a threat. "She's dead," one of them announced after a few seconds. Alexander helped Emily to stand, checking if she was injured. "Are you okay?" "I am." She looked at Margaret's body, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. "Is it really over?" "It's over," Rose approached, firmly hugging her granddaughter. "Helena can rest in peace now." The federal agents spent the next 2 hours collecting evidence, recording testimonies, and formalizing the end of the investigation that had lasted decades. Emily handed over all the recordings, documents, and photographs her mother had left, finally allowing the complete truth to come to light. When they were finally alone in the suite, a place that had witnessed so much pain and secrets, Emily and Alexander sat on the sofa in silence, absorbing the magnitude of what had happened. "Your grandmother is an extraordinary woman," Alexander finally said. "She is. I never knew she had spent all these years planning how to get justice. She loves you very much. You two are lucky to have each other." Emily looked at Alexander, seeing the deep loneliness in his eyes. "And you? Do you have someone now?" "I do, if she forgives me for all the lies." Emily felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Alexander, You don't need to forgive me now," he gently interrupted. "I know I hurt you. I know I lied and hid things I should have told you from the beginning." "Why did you lie?" "Because I was afraid." The admission came out as a whisper. "Afraid that if you knew the truth about my family, about me, you would never want to see me again." "And now?" "Now you know everything. The worst about me, about my family, about what we did and failed to do." Alexander looked at her with a raw vulnerability that broke Emily's heart. "And you're still here." "I'm still here. Does that mean there's hope for us?" Emily thought about everything that had happened in the last few days, the betrayal, the lies, the devastating revelations. But she also thought about the way Alexander had protected her, how he had risked everything to help her, how he had cried in her arms that first night. "It means that I love you," she said simply. "Despite everything, maybe because of everything." Alexander briefly closed his eyes, as if absorbing an unexpected blessing. When he opened them again, there were tears in them. "I love you too, Emily Collins. More than I deserve to love anyone." "Then stop punishing yourself for the sins of your family. You're not responsible for Margaret's or your father's choices. But I am responsible for my own choices, and I choose you. I choose to fight to be the man you deserve." Emily moved closer to him on the sofa, extending her hand to gently touch his face. "And I choose to believe that people can change. that love can heal even the deepest wounds. The kiss they shared was different from all the others, not loaded, with desperate passion or urgent need, but with promise, a promise of honesty, of rebuilt trust, of a future they would build together upon the ruins of the past. When they separated, Alexander rested his forehead on hers. What do we do now? Now. Emily smiled for the first time in days. Now we go home. And tomorrow we start again. 6 months later, Emily was on the balcony of the apartment she shared with Alexander, a cozy place in Brooklyn, far from the ghosts of the Golden Palace, observing the sunset tinting New York in golden tones. The hotel had been sold to an international chain after the exposure of the Pierce family crimes, and Alexander had used the money to create a foundation that offered scholarships to young people from underprivileged communities. Rose had moved to a nearby apartment, finally allowing herself to enjoy some comfort after decades of struggle. She and Alexander had developed an affectionate relationship of mutual respect, united by the love they shared for Emily. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked, hugging her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "About how life can completely change in a matter of days. Change for the better." Emily turned in his arms, looking into the green eyes that now carried no more sadness but hope. Change to perfect. He smiled, that smile that had conquered her heart from the first day. "Emily Collins, may I ask you a question?" "You may." Alexander moved away slightly and knelt before her, taking a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside there was a simple but elegant ring, not ostentatious like the jewelry of high society, but perfect in its simplicity. "Will you marry me? Not because I'm rich or powerful, but because I love you like I've never loved anyone. Because I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I deserve the extraordinary love that you give me." Emily felt tears of happiness running down her face. "Alexander Pierce, are you proposing to me on the balcony of a rented apartment, wearing an old t-shirt and flip-flops?" "I am," he laughed. "This is how we do things now. Simple, honest, real." "Then yes," she extended her hand for him to place the ring. "Yes, I accept marrying you." Alexander stood up and spun her in the air, both laughing like children. When he put her down again, Emily could see Rose's apartment through the window of the building across the street, where her grandmother waved to them with a radiant smile. "Did she know you were going to ask me?" Emily asked. "I asked for her blessing yesterday. She said it was about time you had the family you always deserved." "And will we have that? A real family?" "We'll have everything," Alexander promised, sealing the promise with a kiss that spoke of eternal love, of second chances, and of victories conquered over the shadows of the past. As the sun completely set over New York, Emily Collins, who would soon be Emily Pierce, snuggled in the arms of the man she loved, finally at peace with her past and completely hopeful about the future. Her mother had fought for her to be free, and she finally was, free to love, free to be happy, free to build the life she had always dreamed of. The story of pain and secrets that had defined two families for generations had finally come to an end. In its place, a new story was born, a story of love, redemption, and hope that would extend through future generations. And when Emily looked at the starry sky over New York that night, she was certain that somewhere up there, Helena Collins was finally resting in peace, knowing that her daughter had found true love and the justice that she herself had never been able to achieve. The dark romance had transformed into pure light, and that light would shine forever.